The whip came down before Lyra could draw breath. She did not scream. She had promised herself that much. One small thing to hold on to when everything else was being taken. Her fingers dug into the stone floor of Sorvain's private hall, nails splitting against the cold, and she counted. 1, 2, 3. The mark on her shoulder blazed white-hot with every strike, as if the pain was feeding it rather than killing it. Again, Lady Sorvain said. The guard hesitated. Even he had limits. I said again. The fourth strike landed. Lyra's breath left her in a single controlled exhale. She lifted her eyes from the floor and stared at the opposite wall. A tapestry of Ironspire's royal crest, gold thread on black fabric, wolves running in a circle that never ended. She fixed her gaze there and did not move it. Sorvain crouched in front of her. Her gown pooled on the stone like spilled ink. She was beautiful in the way that certain weapons were beautiful, precisely designed to cause damage. Look at me, Sorvain said. Lyra looked at her. You are a foundling. Sorvain's voice was almost gentle. Almost. You were left at Greyvale Temple with no name, no blood and no future. Whatever you think that mark means, it is not for you. It was never for you. Renounce it. Tell the court it is a fabrication. Walk away from Ironspire tonight, and I will let you live quietly somewhere far from here. Lyra said nothing. Sorvain's gentleness evaporated. You foolish girl. Do you understand what I can still do to you? Yes, Lyra said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Do you understand that it is still there? Sorvain stood. Slowly. She looked at the shoulder, at the mark that 5 lashes had failed to erase, and for one unguarded second, her composure cracked just wide enough for Lyra to see what lived underneath it. Fear. Raw, particular political fear. Then the composure closed again like water over a stone. Take her to the lower hall, Sorvain said. The windowless one. And tell no one she is there. 3 days passed in the dark. Lyra counted time by the meals slid under the door. Once a day, bread and water. Always the same guard who never spoke. She pressed her back against the wall and kept her hand over her shoulder, not to hide the mark but because its warmth was the only warmth available. It pulsed. 3 slow beats over and over, patient as a tide. She had first felt it the night the summoning moon rose. 3 weeks ago, a sky turned bone white, wolves howling across every district of Ironspire, and Lyra waking in her temple cot with her shoulder on fire. She had sat up, looked at the spiral of silver and gold burning into her skin, and felt, for reasons she could not explain, completely unafraid. Not because she was brave. Because something in the pulse felt like recognition. Like a door she had been standing outside for her entire life had just unlocked from the other side. She had hidden it anyway. Of course she had. She was a foundling in a kingdom built on bloodlines. She had survived 22 years by making herself small, quiet, and forgettable. Invisibility was the only armor she owned. It had not been enough. On the 5th day, the guard opened the door and told her she was being moved. Not released. Moved deeper. The bedrock cells beneath Thornwall Keep, where the walls sweated cold water and the silence had weight. Lyra walked without being dragged. She would give Sorvain nothing more. As they descended the last staircase, she passed an older man going the opposite direction. He was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades watching rooms rather than performing in them. A steward's insignia on his collar. He glanced at her shoulder. Just once. Then he looked at her face. She had never seen him before. But something in his expression, not pity, something more purposeful than pity, made her slow her steps. Keep moving, the guard said. She moved. But she thought about that look for the next 6 days in the dark. His name was Brennan. He had served Thornwall Keep for 31 years, which meant he had served 3 different political climates, 2 near coups, 1 actual coup, and 11 years of Lady Sorvain. He had learned early that survival in a court like this required 2 things: a good memory and the discipline to write everything down. He had been writing things down about Sorvain for 4 years. He knocked on the king's war chamber door at the 7th hour, which was irregular enough that the guard let him in without question. Irregularity from Brennan meant urgency, and urgency from Brennan meant something was genuinely wrong. King Aldrin Kale was at the long table, maps spread before him, a half-eaten meal pushed aside. He looked up without surprise. He rarely looked surprised. It was one of the things that made him formidable and, Brennan had always thought privately, one of the things that made him isolated. Brennan. My lord. Brennan placed the leather folio on the table. I need you to read this before I explain it. The reading will make the explanation shorter. The king looked at the folio, then at Brennan. Then he opened it. He read for 11 minutes. Brennan stood and counted the wall stones. When the king finished, he closed the folio, set his hands flat on the table. How long has she been in the bedrock cell? 6 days, my lord. And before that? 3 days in the lower hall. And before that, the punishment. Brennan paused. She did not renounce the mark. Lady Sorvain had her lashed 5 times. The mark remained. The king was quiet for a long moment. Then, and Brennan had served this man for 9 years and had never seen him do this. He reached up and unfastened the top of his tunic. Over his heart, a spiral of silver and gold pulsed in the dim lamplight. 3 slow beats. Brennan exhaled. You knew. I felt it, Aldrin said. The night of the summoning moon. I assumed. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked. I assumed wrongly. My lord. How old is she? 22. A foundling from Greyvale Temple. It was not a question. He had read the file. No family. No protection. No one who would notice if she disappeared. No one except me, Brennan said quietly. The king stood. He refastened his tunic, picked up the folio, and said 4 words in a voice so level it was almost frightening. Bring her up. Tonight. Lyra had stopped counting days. It was not despair that made her stop. It was a decision. Counting made the darkness feel like it was winning. So she stopped counting and started listening instead. To the drip of water down the far wall. To the distant sound of boots on stone 2 floors above. To the mark on her shoulder, which had not stopped pulsing since the night they brought her down here. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. She had begun to think of it as breathing. Something alive somewhere above her. Breathing in rhythm with her own lungs without knowing it. Or perhaps knowing it perfectly. She was pressing her back against the wall, eyes closed, following that rhythm when she heard the door. Not the slide of bread under it. The full, heavy, deliberate sound of a bolt being drawn back. She opened her eyes. The doorway filled with torchlight, and behind the torchlight stood Brennan, the gray-haired steward she had passed on the staircase. Beside him, a guard she did not recognize. And behind them both, a figure whose silhouette alone changed the temperature of the room. King Aldrin Kale stepped into the cell. He was taller than she had imagined, broader. But it was not his size that hit her first, it was his stillness. He stood in the center of that wretched little room and looked at her the way you look at something you have been searching for in the wrong places for a very long time. Lyra did not move. She was not sure her legs would allow it. Can you stand? He asked. His voice was low and even. Yes, she said. And she stood because she refused to be found on the floor by anyone, including a king. He looked at her shoulder. The mark was visible. Her robe had torn during the move down here and she had stopped bothering to adjust it. The spiral glowed faintly in the torchlight, silver gold, pulsing its 3 steady beats. Aldrin reached up and opened his tunic. Lyra's breath stopped. The matching mark over his heart pulsed back at hers. 3 beats. Synchronized. Perfectly, completely, undeniably synchronized. Nobody spoke for a moment that felt much longer than it was. I owe you an apology, the king said. Of all the things she had imagined a king might say, commands, dismissals, political calculations dressed as kindness, That was not one of them. She felt something dangerous move through her chest. Something that felt uncomfortably close to tears, which she absolutely refused to shed in a bedrock cell in front of a man she had known for 40 seconds. "You didn't know," she said. "I should have known sooner." His jaw tightened briefly. "I will not make that argument on my own behalf. It doesn't deserve to be made." Brennan stepped forward. "My lord, we should move. Lady Sorvain's handmaid does the late rounds at." "I know," Aldrin said. He looked at Lyra. "I need you to trust me for the next 12 hours. After that, you will never have to trust anyone against your will again." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, at the mark on his chest still pulsing, at Brennan, whose careful eyes held something that had kept her company through 6 days of darkness without either of them exchanging a word. 12 hours, she said. "All right." Morning court assembled with no explanation given, which in Thornwall Keep meant something significant was coming. Lords and stewards and consorts filed into the great hall with the careful energy of people who had learned to read silences. Lady Sorvain arrived last, which was her habit. Always last, always composed, always the room's gravitational center before the king even entered. She wore deep burgundy. Her hair was perfect. She had spent the early morning constructing her narrative for whatever was coming, and she had constructed it well. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. King Aldrin entered and did not sit. That was the first signal. He stood at the head of the hall, and the room adjusted to him the way rooms always did. Back straightening, voices dying, attention snapping forward without being commanded. Then the side door opened and Lyra walked in. A murmur moved through the court. Sorvain's expression did not change. She had prepared for this. She began to move her lips into the opening of her rehearsed account. The fabricated mark, the delusional foundling, the regrettable but necessary discipline. Lady Sorvain. The king's voice was not loud. Did not need to be. "You will have the opportunity to speak. It will not be yet." Sorvain closed her mouth. Aldrin opened the folio Brennan had compiled and began to read. Not dramatically. Methodically. The way a man lays evidence before people who will be required to act on it. Each document named. Each testimony cited. Each of Sorvain's orders, the punishment, the confinement, the transfers, the false charges. Read aloud in a voice that gave them nowhere to hide. The room grew very still. Sorvain's composure held through the first half. Through the second half it began to cost her visibly. A tightness around her eyes, a single swallow she could not fully conceal. The lords nearest to her shifted almost imperceptibly away. When the king finished reading, he set the folio down. 11 years, he said. 11 years I allowed this court to run in ways I did not examine closely enough. That ends this morning. Starting with this. He opened his tunic. The mark blazed in the morning light pouring through the hall's high windows. Gasps broke across the room like a wave. Not theatrical gasps, the genuine kind. The involuntary sound people make when something they half believe turns out to be completely real. Sorvain's face finally collapsed. Not into tears. Into something worse. Into the expression of a person watching everything they built reveal itself as having been constructed on sand. "You built your power on the erasure of truth," the king said, looking directly at her. "The truth did not erase. It waited." He stripped her title in 4 formal sentences. She was escorted from the hall without resistance. The door closed behind her and the room exhaled as one. Aldrin crossed the hall to Lyra. He did not make a speech. He simply placed his right hand over the mark on her shoulder, warm, steady, certain. Her mark pulsed. His pulsed. 3 beats together in front of every witness in that room. Every person in the great hall of Thornwall Keep lowered themselves to one knee. Not from obligation. From recognition. Some truths do not need to be announced. They only need to be seen. 6 months later, the crown was silver with a single crescent inlaid above the brow. It was not the heaviest thing Lyra had ever carried. Not even close. She stood at the window the night before the coronation, looking at the moon, full white, indifferent to politics and perfectly aware of everything else. She touched the mark on her shoulder. It pulsed gently. 3 times. She thought of the girl who had practiced invisibility like it was a virtue, who had convinced herself that being unseen was the same as being safe, who had endured 5 lashes in a cold hall and 6 days in a dark cell and had not renounced the one true thing that had ever, without being asked, without being earned, without requiring her to be anyone other than exactly who she was, chosen her. That girl had survived every attempt to erase her. Tomorrow she would be crowned. She let herself be seen by the moon and said nothing and felt, for the first time in 22 years, entirely unhidden. The next morning, in the great hall of Thornwall Keep, King Aldrin Kale placed the crown on her head. She did not look overwhelmed. She did not look like someone receiving something unexpected. She looked like someone who had finally arrived somewhere they had always been going. The end. Asterisk if the moon's chosen kept you reading until the very last line, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us your favorite moment from the story, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Every comment, every like, every subscription tells us to keep these stories coming.